everybody.
Hi.
Glad to see you bright and early. Well, for some of us, it's bright and early. I don't know where you came from. I am Amanda and Toomey. This is Annetta Toomey. And our title is Preliminary Reflections on Establishing a Cognitive Apprenticeship Program for STM Enrichment, which is Science, Technology, and Math, in case you didn't already guess that. We are co-founders of Mustard Seed Community Learning. Push the button, please. Whoops, push the arrow button. Push the arrow button. There you go. So this is generally our organization for our presentation today. Annetta's going to talk about our general philosophy and our pedagogy and sort of where we're coming at this from. And then I'll walk through a little more detail of how we implemented that at our facility, our reflections, things that we've changed, what we found out going forward. Alright, so I will turn it over to Annetta for the first part here.
I think you need to turn off the little speaker. Interesting. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I am Annetta. Yes, we are related, as you can probably tell. We're a mother-daughter team. It was kind of funny, a little story, as she is working on her computer research, and I am actually working on my research in educational foundations and science literacy. So as we started getting closer to our research projects, we started realizing we were talking about a lot of the same terms and a lot of the, hey, you know what if, and we also had two other graduate students kind of in the same boat, you know, how you sit around the student union coffee shop, you're like, you know, in the perfect world, this would work just like this. Well, after about 2 years doing all our prelims, you're like, maybe we should try this. So this is kind of what we're going to talk about today, is what we put together, what we thought would be the perfect world versus what really happens. As an education foundation, we started out with the National Science Education Standards. We started out in 2012, so the new generation hadn't passed any standards yet. So went ahead, and a lot of our links are to the National Science Education in 1996. What we did is we started out with, of course, we need numbers for everything. What we did is we did a 25-year comparison over time on how the U.S. is performing on the standardized tests. And as you can see, we're kind of in 4th grade, 8th grade, and 12th grade, the flat lines are a little too high, but we're kind of flatlining across there. So this is where we started. The questions are, how do we move the marker? How do we get it to go up? It's okay down. And this is, I put the whole verbiage in there. I don't know if you want to read it on, but you know how it is when we write. It's basically, we've averaged 51% for 2 generations. Now, in my public science classroom, I would give someone an F. Like, you're not passing. So, in Missouri, we struggle even a little bit more than some states do. We have our two metropolitan areas have been struggling for over 40 years. Some of you may know that Kansas City is a classic disaster of public education. St. Louis was right there with them. In the last 15 years, they have made gains in St. Louis, whereas Kansas City just now, this past review, regained some of its provisional certification. Before, they spent 3 years with no certification at all. So when we go looking at it, it's like, okay, what do we think where the connection isn't? Because it's not that we believe that teacher education isn't working. We believe there's some disconnect somewhere. So that's kind of where we're going. So as we looked through the literature, we found that maybe we're not giving our students enough background or context to put the new learning in. And that maybe also, through our research, we're learning that academic languages in lexicon are not taught in elementary school. So by the time they got to me in middle school or the high school, students were just so like, what are you talking about? You know, so that was where we came in. So we have termed it, we're going to look at it on the macro scale, and we're going to look at it as the macro culture of science learning. So a definition, one thing we did learn in our interviews with teachers are specific science disciplines define the words differently. So we have to start out with, okay, this is our definition and this is where we're going from there. So the science community is a fellowship of individuals who share common beliefs, attitudes, interests, and goals of science. That's our definition of the community. Down below, our big question is understanding the science community important to student learning? Do our students have to understand what we're talking about to help them get to that next? So and then where do we place that in the teacher education program? Where do students learn? The second one is, again, going back to science culture. Our definition, the tacit and explicit manifestations of the science community: language, customs, habits, symbols, regulations, history, sociology, and intellectual theories, achievements that define the attitudes and behavior of science. Yes, it's a great big convoluted thing, but sometimes when we miss part of the pieces, we've broken that chain of understanding. Okay, I thought this slide looked really cool when I made it, but I realized you're not going to be able to read it because I should have ditched Alfred. But basically what this is saying, this goes back to, we discovered also through our learning and our research, this is where we go back to the mentorship model. Is, again, we believe that teacher ed is great for where it is. But as new teachers, going back to the National Science Standards and No Child Left Behind, it talks about a lot about the quality teachers. Having quality teachers in the classroom. Well, most of us would agree that a new teacher right out of teacher college isn't a highly qualified person. They may be really smart, may be really clever, but we know that in the classroom and in teaching, there's tricks of the trade that we all have to learn along the way. So that's where this little picture right here is a conglomeration we put together of, instead of the 5 E's that we teach in teacher ed, this is what we're really trying to get into our classrooms, and we need to kind of have all these components to help our students get to science learning. So you need the nature of science, you need the history of science. How do we go from what's the path of science understanding? So we call it the science sphere. Everything that is related to science, we call the science sphere. The cognitive apprenticeship model was forwarded into the academic sciences at the college level in the 1990s. Basically, they took the standard coaching, modeling, and they added to it. And they're like, we need to do reflections, we need to do more coaching, we need to be more hands-on. So the research that we found is that actually students, when we're using the science language and the lexicon and showing how we're doing, we're adding that extra layer or link to our students' learning. And I know it's hard in the classroom now when we all have, at least in Missouri, they give you we need these 182 things learned before they take their test. And you're like, well, that's really not teaching, but if that's, you're my boss. So trying to get that all in, a lot of times, you just have to step up and you're like, your little ducks are coming along with you. I've taught all levels of middle school. And so if we can get them in the 5th and 6th grade and get them transitioned to some of that stuff, that's going to be awesome because you'll keep them interested. And that's where the mentorship comes in. And now Amanda's going to take over and explain about mustard seed.
Alright, so as you kind of started to say, at Mustard Seed we use cognitive apprenticeship, which is a social construct constructivism idea. As she said, it's a lot of hands-on. Really what differentiates cognitive apprenticeship from your traditional apprenticeships, if you think about sort of when you read old like medieval literature, like an apprentice is like the blacksmith, right? And they go and they make the horseshoes first, and then they make more and more complex things. What cognitive apprenticeship does is it takes those things that are very mental, so it can be computing, it can be science, and you have to verbalize those. If I'm a blacksmith's apprentice, I can sit there and watch you make a horseshoe, and it's all very visual and sort of tactile, where if I'm teaching somebody how to program, that's all very mental and it's internal, so I have to vocalize that. And a lot of times in computing we'll call that a think aloud activity, where I'm going to say absolutely everything that pops into my head, even if it's something crazy. But if I do that as the mentor, as the master instructor, that shows my thinking process to the apprentice. Our two biggest things is that knowledge is demonstrated and the context matters. So all of our units, are very topical. So rather than say, I'm going to teach a class that is physical science, we'll take a concept like leaves, and we'll talk about with our younger kids, which I'll talk in more detail later. We'll talk about why do they change colors, why do the seasons change. We'll talk about all these different things that are coming from physical and life sciences and earth sciences and bring them all together around this central topic. So before I go into too much detail about that, just really quick, where we're at, we're in Lee Summit, Missouri. It's a suburb of Kansas City. She already described the Kansas City region quite a bit, so I'm not going to go into too much detail there. We are in a historic downtown, which provides us with a few benefits. We have a lot of walk-by traffic that comes in, and they see our advertising that way. And we also do community special events. So if there's a parade, we open up. We have what we call touch tables, where the students come in. We'll have one of our master instructors there that explains what's going on with that table. So we'll have one of our people bring in geology things, and he's got little puppets that he does a puppet show. And he talks about dinosaurs and how they laid eggs and all of this stuff that you don't necessarily see in school because there's simply not enough time. Our staff, we have a few kind of paid staff. We have a lot of volunteers. Most of us are certified K-12 teachers. We also have some professionals in the field. So one of our units that I'll show here in a little bit, we had an engineer come in and kind of talk about how it related to what she does in the biomedical field. We also have some professors from local universities who come in and volunteer. Our dinosaur guy I was just talking about it. He's retired now, but he does adjunct work, and he comes in, and it's a lot of fun. So as we said a few times, our primary goal is to improve the community understanding of science, technology, and applied mathematics. It's not a replacement for your traditional school. It's not a replacement for traditional tutoring, although we do some tutoring as well. It's really full community, everybody from preschool through senior citizens. We want you to understand what you're seeing in the news, what you're seeing going on in the world around you. So again, another one of those really heavy slides. Basically, what we're looking at is each student who comes in, we're going to meet them where they are, and we're going to work with them at their pace to bring them forward to where they want to be. And that may take, with some of our gifted students, they just go really fast. And they'll whip through it, and we're like, wow, that's amazing. Like, coming out of the classroom, you would never expect a 5-year-old to sit there and be like, oh yeah, I understand gravity and friction and all of these things that I've got high schoolers who struggle with. But we also, as I said, do the tutoring, and we'll bring in like a chemistry student who's struggling just a little bit, and we'll say, okay, here's the hands-on, here's the diagram, here's the models that you can touch and feel, and here's how they relate to that equation that you're trying to balance. So we really go both directions. We have sort of our gimmick is that everybody's assigned to a rank. And so, I'm falling down here. So we started out with apprentice and journeyman classes. Our apprentice classes are about the middle school age. Our journeyman classes are high school. We also have a master class, which is our professional development that we do. We added initiate and then what we call hatchling and fledgling classes when we realized that we needed to start at a younger age before the students lost interest in science. So your initiate is about 5th or 6th grade equivalent. Apprentice is about 7th or 8th grade, and then journeyman is going your high school years. And again, this is not, we don't do it based on age. We do it based on what your understanding is. So we'll have kids come in that are 10 or 12 and they're up in the journeyman level in physics maybe, and they'll maybe an initiate in biology. So, this is our sort of generic rubric as we go along. Again, you kind of start at that lower level. Maybe they understand some of the terminology. Okay, I've heard that the earth is round. But when I think about that, do I mean the earth is round like a beach ball, which is what probably everybody in the room thinks of, or do I mean the earth is round like a coin? Because they're both round. If you're a kid, you don't necessarily know, if you've never seen a globe, which is which. And then they progress up to the point where, of course, when you get to mastery, that's where you have your instructors and your professors and things like this. So we use a hybrid learning environment. It's partially online, partially face-to-face. And what we do is we start out the online component as sort of what would traditionally be your textbook work. So if you've ever heard of flipped classrooms, this is what they do. They send the kids home, here's your book materials, read this. We sometimes use books. A lot of times what that is the instructor will put together a web page basically of information. It'll maybe have some videos from YouTube, some documentaries, maybe from PBS, something like that. And then we'll have some questions. And the students will answer those questions. They tend to be short answer type of questions or short essays. And then the instructor gives feedback. And a lot of times we'll have the students sort of go through this process 2 or 3 times. So I answer the question, now I'm going to give them feedback. And one of the things we really had to help them understand was there's not grades in our system. What we have is those levels of understanding. So your answer may be right, but I may still ask you to rewrite it and go into a little more depth and think about it a little more fully and give me some more details. Then we do the on-site instruction. That's where they get that hands-on, they're doing their labs, they're doing experiments, that type of thing. And finally, we have what we call a guild meeting, and they have to go in and basically defend what they've learned. Especially our older students, we ask them to kind of design their own experiments rather than do kind of the cookbook type of experiments. And so they'll have to come in and say, this is what I chose to do, this is why I chose to do it, and then explain in terms of the rest of the guild, which may be younger students or maybe older students who are in a different, slightly different subject, why they did what they did, what they learned, really making that story of science theirs, rather than, I read in a book that Isaac Newton did this. Now they've done it themselves and they can tell their own story. So we did 2 years of beta tests that we're sort of reflecting on in our presentation today. Our first year we used, I put 25 homeschool students. We actually had 2 public school students and 23 homeschool students that started with us. We offered them a free unit in order to get some feedback on our model and how it was going. 2 of the students made it to the end of the 16-week period. None of them completed it as we had expected. It was an abysmal failure, I guess you could say. From that standpoint, I do think that they learned a lot, the students that were there. We certainly learned a lot about what you should do and what works and what doesn't work. We use, for our online program, we use what's called Moodle. It's similar to Blackboard, if you're familiar with that. It's similar to the old WebCT. But it's free if you have somebody who's technical enough to upload it, which I am. So that's why we chose that. It also allows for multiple assignments for the various students. I'll have a diagram up here where I'll show you. So because we want the students to be able to sort of go at their own pace, we'd have a pre-assignment. And then based on how they did at that, I may give this student sort of the, I don't want to say lower end because we have all these negative connotations with that, but I give them the assignment that requires less background knowledge. And then what they'll basically, if they want to get to the same level, they'll have to go through more steps to get there. Or if I have a student who I'm I'll give them a more difficult assignment. And Moodle will allow you to do that, where I can go in and I can say, okay, this needs to go down track 1, track 2, track 3. Originally, we had all the courses were separate. We had them spread out. What we realized is that really doesn't work very well, so we combined them all together so that they would have, instead of us sort of pre-assessing them and saying, you're going to be in Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. So what we found out is when we had siblings, some of them cheated. Which they would not admit to, but when the younger student blows away the test and makes you think that, oh yeah, they did amazing, and then they get in and they can't even write a complete sentence, you go, something is not quite right here. We did have 1 or 2 students actually admit to cheating as well when their parents found out what they had done. They made them come in. So it was a very interesting experience because our students, these were middle school and high school students, they're very used to the idea that I have to do well. I have to get a good grade. And so in their mind, that was the key thing. I have to score really, really well on this. And they didn't understand the concept of a placement test as something where it's fine if you only get 2 of the 20 questions right. That just tells us where you're at. So this is just really quickly, because I know we're running short on time, a look at what our year 1 looked like. Here's my note that I finally put on there about the grades. If they're not grades, stop panicking. It's okay. Go ahead and click. So they could resubmit assignments as many times as they wanted to, as many times as we asked them to. And this is where we combine them together. So originally we had the magic creativity was a little video of a superconducting magnet. If you've ever seen those, they float because they're so cool. And the Flash activity was how many cheeseburgers does Flash need to eat in order to keep up his energy. And if any of you have seen the new TV show, they actually addressed that, which is really, really awesome from a science standpoint. And we had them do those. So here's a photo. So they each had a little bit of a description about what they needed to do, and I put on there, I don't expect you to know this. I mean, I really don't expect them to know what a superconductor is at 15. But I was trying to see what is their method, how do they think about these things. And then they also had to do sort of a written, we had a literacy person at the time that we were trying to get that science literacy in there. And so they had to answer some questions that she could see what's their writing ability. And as I said, we had everyone from, wow, they write amazing, to they don't even use capitalization and punctuation in their sentences. So that was really interesting. This is what an example lesson would look like. So they start out with a scientific method, and there was a little video on there as well, and they had to, their assignment was, I think, write 3 things that you've observed in this video, 3 inferences that you can make, 3 observations you can make, and then that fed them down into these others of whichever level they needed to go into for what they were doing. These are some of the others moving forward. So the idea was that they would go through the whole scientific method, and eventually they would design sort of their own experiment and be able to do that during the on-site, and then be able to come in and present to the guild what they had done. Year 2, and you'll have time for questions. I'm sorry, I'm going really fast because I don't have a watch. As you kind of guessed, we figured out starting at the middle school, high school level, not a good idea. A lot of our kids were very, very resistant at the beginning. Part of the reason why 23 of the 25 dropped out was because they would do things like, I can't access the site. And we finally had to have a meeting with them and say, yes, you can, and here's the logs of where you did. I can't do this, it's too hard, she keeps making me redo it. Just a lot of this type of stuff. We had a lot of them that just outright refused to do anything because they didn't want to. So what we did is we went back, year 2, we started doing preschool and early elementary students, which was an adventure of a whole other sort for those of us who were used to teaching middle school and high school, but a lot of fun at the same time. The kids at that age are still very passionate about it, and you can really hit them with the vocabulary and things. So they're like, yeah, gravity! They really are. We had this funnest time. So originally, we were going to have the parents be a new class of people called sponsors, who were going to do some of the things at home to sort of prep their students, and then they would come come in and do what we called Screech Club, where they would come in. These are our hatchlings and fledglings, around our owl being the mascot thing. And then they would come in and do some experiments, and we would do sort of the guild meeting thing all together. Basically, every one of our parents is like, oops, forgot that. Oh, well, we didn't feel like it. Oh, well, we didn't get it done. And it was never getting done. We were spending, hours designing, because we had, as you'll see on the next slide, parent notes that they could go through. So this is the one we did in January. We called it Kitchen Chemistry. Again, this is all integrated. So you did one earth science, one physical science, one life science, is what we were doing. So we talked about the cooking process, how heat works. We talked about yeast for the biological science, and we did mining. We talked about like salt and things like that for the earth science. Can you push the next button? So this is what we would give for any general unit. We've given an overview of this is what your student's going to be talking about this time. And then they had different activities. So this is the background notes we gave to the parent. And we said, here's everything you need to know to do this experiment with your students. Which was a lot of fun to design, but apparently nobody was watching. So they did, this was a History Channel, how do you make sourdough bread? How did they probably come up with this idea? It was actually probably an accident. And then we had over on the mold talking about penicillin and sort of the accidental discovery of that. But just all of these different notes, we have different links. Can you push the button? Then we have stories, because we like to tie in that literature. Thank you. I got plenty of time.
8:27.
Oh. Okay, well, we're supposed to give them time for questions.
Yeah.
Okay. We would do different things. So this is if they wanted to sort of make cheese at home, which we told them, that's a big process. But if you think your student's ready for it, if you're ready for it, go for it. And here's information. Here's how you do that. Here's the stories that you can tell. But we have Little Miss Muffet, and Curds and Whey, and sort of these more child-oriented things as well. So this is what the student version of the activity sheet would look like. The parents were expected to print this off and sort of go through it. And what we asked them to do was to cook a meal. So this is only one of several different sheets. They were asked to cook some sort of meat protein dish. If they didn't do meat, then we had an alternative, which I can't recall offhand what it was, the vegan alternative. But basically talk to their students about why does meat change color when you heat it up. And then some of those notes were in there. Making a leavened bread, so something that would rise, and talking to their students about how yeast works and why it makes your bread nice and fluffy. And they had to make a salad at one point that was talking about physical changes. So if you cut something up, it's still the same thing, but it's cut into pieces. So they basically have, it's hard to see on here, they have little check marks as they go through each step. And then we have little questions for the parents to ask. Why do you think this is happening? What kind of change did we make here? And sort of walk through that step. And then we had just some other resources that they could list. So Red Star Yeast actually has a whole bunch of recipes for different things, so that was where we sort of directed them to find bread recipes if they didn't have one. USDA fact sheets in this case, because they were working with food. So I've kind of hinted on these a little bit, but basically what we found was optimal entry is at that elementary level. One of the things that I forgot to mention earlier when we were doing the older ones is in this mentor relationship, as I said, we're meeting those students where they are. And so their assignments, so to speak, are based upon what they've done, what they've demonstrated that their knowledge is. Which, as I'm sure everybody in the room knows, is that's what you do when you're a mentor. You meet the person where they are and you sort of walk through the process with them. A lot of our parents that we had been homeschool parents for years, and they were used to, here's the book, you walk through this lesson, then this lesson, then this lesson. And so what they wanted from us was, give me all of the assignments that my student is going to complete the next 16 weeks. Totally impossible, because I don't know where your student's going to be. So that was this real source of contention, especially with the high school parents, but you can't tell me what their assignment is. I want to see, not only did they want to see the assignments, they wanted to see the answer keys as well. Because they also had that mentality of it needs to be, a good grade and this. So by going to an earlier level, you've got more passion from the students. You've got parents who aren't as ingrained in this, I need to go through the book kind of process. And it really just worked a lot better to try to catch them early. As I said, we still do tutoring, we still do older student programs, but we don't push that as hard. I guess you could say we let them come to us. So if it's somebody who comes in and says, I'm really interested in learning about this, we know they're going to have a passion. And we sit down and we have a real discussion with them and say, this is how the cognitive apprenticeship program works. This is how that mentorship works. And you have to understand that going in, where the first time we did it, we had that conversation, but I don't think we made it clear enough to them. This is not a textbook. This is not going through